I'm Alana Mitchell, 28, and as I pulled into my parents' driveway for Thanksgiving, my stomach twisted into knots. The colonial house that once felt like a sanctuary now loomed like a courthouse. Dad's Mercedes and Mom's Range Rover gleamed in the fading light, symbols of the success I'd recently walked away from. Through the bay window, I glimpsed my father's dismissive glance as I approached. My mother's tight smile greeted me at the door, her eyes already evaluating my appearance. I never imagined that the turkey wouldn't be the only thing carved up at dinner that night. Before I tell you how my family disowned me over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join our community of survivors who've rebuilt their lives after losing what they thought was their foundation. The Mitchells are old money with new expectations. My father, Richard, built his father's modest business into a corporate empire through ruthless determination and an unyielding work ethic. He wears his success like armor, custom suits membership at the most exclusive country club in Connecticut, and a network of connections that spans the eastern seaboard. His disappointment has always been more terrifying than his anger. My mother, Eleanor, perfected the art of upper-class domesticity while maintaining her position as the queen bee of Greenwich society. Her charity galas are legendary, her tennis game impeccable, and her ability to deliver cutting remarks with a perfect smile unmatched. She curates her children's lives with the same precision she uses to arrange her award-winning rose garden. My older brother Bradley followed my father's path without hesitation. Princeton undergraduate, Harvard Business School, and now a senior vice president at my father's company by 32. He married Charlotte, the perfect corporate wife with the right family connections, and a talent for hosting dinner parties that advance his career. They have 2 children with impeccable manners and private school acceptance letters already secured. My sister Catherine married into the Wilson family, old money with political connections. She serves on the right boards, produces the right number of grandchildren, and never makes waves. Her husband's family name opened doors even my father couldn't, something she never lets anyone forget. Then there's me, the family's perpetual problem. Alana has so much potential, my mother would say to her friends with a theatrical sigh. If only she would apply herself properly. From childhood, I was groomed for a specific life. Tennis lessons, piano recitals, cotillion, and the right schools. My grades were never discussed unless they were perfect. My weight was monitored with casual comments about watching those holiday treats. My clothing choices were subject to inspection before leaving the house until I left for college. The Mitchell name means something my father would remind me. Everything you do reflects on this family. I followed the prescribed path through Georgetown, and then Yale Law, crushing my interest in social work to pursue corporate law. The pride on my parents' faces at my law school graduation was the first unrestrained approval I'd felt in years. I secured a position at Harrington & Blake, one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms specializing in corporate defense. For 5 years, I lived the life they wanted. 70-hour work weeks defending corporations against environmental violations, discrimination suits, and fraud allegations. I dated Jonathan Whitaker, the son of my father's golf partner, and a rising investment banker. I maintained the right weight, wore the right clothes, joined the right gym, and made appearances at the right events. The breakdown came gradually, then suddenly. Defending a pharmaceutical company that had knowingly covered up deadly side effects of a medication. Working through pneumonia to meet deadlines. Watching my pro bono case helping a domestic violence survivor get pushed aside for billable priorities. Jonathan's casual remark that I'd need to give up working after we had children like all the sensible wives. 3 months ago, I walked away from all of it. Resigned from the firm, ended things with Jonathan, and accepted a position as legal counsel for the Environmental Justice Alliance, a nonprofit fighting corporate polluters. My salary dropped to 1/3 of what I'd been making. I moved from my luxury high-rise to a small apartment in a transitional neighborhood in Brooklyn. The phone calls started immediately. "This is just a phase, darling," my mother insisted. "Everyone gets burnout sometimes. You're throwing away everything we've built for you," my father thundered. "This isn't just disappointing Alana. It's selfish." Bradley called to talk sense into me. Catherine texted articles about quarter-life crises. But I stood firm, experiencing an unfamiliar feeling that took weeks to identify genuine purpose. The Thanksgiving invitation came with clear subtext: "Come prepared to discuss your situation and how to rectify it." I arrived with both hope and dread churning inside me. hope that they might listen and understand, dread that they wouldn't try. As I stepped through the front door, the familiar scent of my mother's perfume mixed with Thanksgiving spices hit me. Eleanor kissed the air beside my cheek, her eyes cataloging my appearance. "You look comfortable, darling," she said, a slight frown appearing between her perfectly microbladed eyebrows. "That sweater is certainly practical." I followed her into the living room where the extended family had gathered. Aunt Margaret and Uncle William, Cousin Jessica with her new fiancé Todd, my father's sister Ruth with her husband Robert, and my grandparents Mitchell, now in their 80s but still sharp-eyed and judgmental. My father acknowledged me with a nod, not bothering to stand. "Alana," he said, taking a sip of his scotch. "I thought nonprofits operated during banking hours." "You're late." "Traffic was heavy, Dad," I replied, accepting a glass of wine from the server. "If you still lived in Manhattan instead of that questionable neighborhood, you wouldn't have had to cross the bridge during rush hour," he noted, turning back to his conversation with Uncle William. Bradley and Charlotte arrived moments later with their children immediately drawing approving attention. Catherine and her husband James were already there, seamlessly engaged in conversation with the group as if they'd been rehearsing their talking points. "Everyone to the dining room," my mother announced. "Dinner is ready to be served." As we moved toward the formal dining room, my grandfather Mitchell caught my elbow. "Here you've gone rogue," he said, his voice cracking with age but his eyes sharp. "Interesting choice." Before I could respond, my mother was directing everyone to their seats. I found myself between Cousin Jessica and Aunt Margaret, directly across from my father. The crystal gleamed, the silver shone, and the tension simmered beneath polite smiles. "Shall we begin?" my father asked, picking up the carving knife. The Mitchell Thanksgiving table was a masterpiece of upper-class tradition. Mom's heirloom china gleamed under the chandelier that had hung in our dining room for 3 generations. The crystal stemware caught the light, throwing prisms across the starched white tablecloth. Silver serving dishes held perfectly arranged food that looked like it belonged in a gourmet magazine. Everything spotless, everything perfect. My father carved the organic free-range turkey with surgical precision. Eleanor watched with practiced admiration, as if seeing this performance for the first time, rather than the 30th. The conversation flowed with careful pleasantries as the plates were filled and wine glasses topped off. "Jessica, that engagement ring is absolutely stunning," my mother commented, reaching for her glass of Chardonnay. "Todd has excellent taste." Jessica beamed, extending her hand to display the sizable diamond. "Thank you, Aunt Eleanor. We're thinking about a June wedding at the Westchester Country Club." "Perfect choice," my mother approved. "Alana, did you know Todd and Jessica met through the Junior League charity auction, the one you used to attend before your phase?" There it was, the first needle so skillfully inserted I almost didn't feel it. "I've been pretty busy lately, Mom," I responded, keeping my tone light. "Yes, with your new job," she said. The pause, making it clear that she hardly considered it employment at all. "How is that going? The environmental thing?" I took a breath. "It's going really well, actually. We just filed a major class action lawsuit against Mid-Atlantic Chemical for contaminating groundwater in 3 counties. The evidence we've gathered shows they knew about the leaks for years and falsified reports to regulators." A silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. "Bradley's department just closed the Westridge acquisition," he announced. $300 million in new business for the company. The board was extremely impressed with his strategy. "It was a team effort," Bradley said, modestly, though his smile was anything but. Charlotte was amazing too. She hosted the entire executive team for dinner last month. The CEO's wife is still raving about her soufflé. "That's wonderful," my mother beamed. "Such a power couple." I tried again. "One of the communities affected by the chemical contamination has childhood cancer rates 5 times the national average. We're pushing for a medical monitoring fund as part of the settlement." "That's nice, dear, but it's hardly a career," my mother said dismissively. "These little causes come and go." "It's not a little cause, Mom. These are people's lives." Bradley leaned forward. "Look, Alana, if you're having trouble finding your way back to a proper firm, I know several people who could help. Everyone understands a momentary lapse in judgment." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate choice based on my values. My father snorted softly, cutting himself another slice of turkey. Jessica's fiancé Todd, an investment banker with Morgan Stanley, cleared his throat. The nonprofit sector can be rewarding in non-monetary ways, I suppose. Our firm handles several trust funds that donate to environmental causes. Very trendy right now with the younger generation. Exactly, my mother seized on this. A phase. Something to get out of your system before returning to serious work. I set down my fork. My work is serious, Mom. Serious enough to pay your bills, my father interjected. His eyes met mine directly for the first time that evening. Your mother tells me you've moved apartments. To Brooklyn. The question hung in the air like a prosecutor's trap. Yes, I admitted. My new salary doesn't cover Manhattan rent. I found a nice place in Prospect Heights. Prospect Heights' grandmother Mitchell questioned her voice, carrying the same tone she might use to say sewage treatment plant. It's an up-and-coming neighborhood, I defended. Up-and-coming usually means you shouldn't walk alone at night, Catherine remarked, exchanging knowing glances with Charlotte. My apartment is perfectly safe. What about your future, my father pressed? Your 401k health insurance. The loan payments on your law degree. I've worked it all out, I said, though my voice didn't sound as confident as I'd hoped. The nonprofit has benefits, and I'm on an income-based repayment plan for my loans. Income-based, my father repeated flatly. So, you're planning to pay the minimum for 20 years and then stick taxpayers with the balance. That's your financial strategy. Richard Aunt Margaret cautioned gently. My father ignored her. You had a corner office at Harrington and Blake, a 6-figure salary, a clear path to partner, and you threw it away to chase windmills like some idealistic undergraduate. I wasn't happy, Dad. Happiness, he scoffed. Since when is work about happiness? Work is about building something, creating security, making a contribution that matters. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. By living in a questionable neighborhood and begging for donations, this is what happens when you throw away everything we've built for you. The table fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, a mixture of pity and judgment. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass. Maybe we should change the subject, Uncle William suggested. But the dam had broken. There would be no going back now. I don't understand how you could be so ungrateful, my mother said, dabbing at her eyes with her linen napkin. Do you have any idea the sacrifices we made for your education? This wasn't the first time I'd heard about these sacrifices, though our family's significant wealth made the narrative somewhat questionable. We prioritized your future over everything, she continued. The best schools, SAT tutors, application consultants. Your father personally called his classmate on Yale's admissions committee. I got into Yale Law on my own merits, Mom, I said quietly. After we spent $20,000 on LSAT preparation and college consultants, my father countered. Not to mention the full tuition we paid while your classmates took on debt. Bradley set down his wine glass with a decisive clink. When Dad paid for my MBA, I saw it as an investment in the family legacy. I've turned that investment into dividends for everyone. What are you doing with yours? I'm trying to make a difference in people's lives. So am I, Bradley argued. Our company employs over 15,000 people. That's 15,000 families with health insurance, retirement plans, and stable incomes. What tangible impact does your environmental justice actually have? Catherine leaned forward. Alana, we're just worried about you. There's a natural progression to life. First, career establishment, then marriage, then children while you're still young enough. You're derailing yourself at a critical juncture. Not everyone wants the same things, Catherine. Maybe not, but everyone needs financial security and family stability, she insisted. You had both with Jonathan. He was planning to propose, you know. The revelation hit me like a slap. How would you know that? My mother looked away guiltily. He spoke with your father, asked for his blessing, had already picked out the ring from Tiffany, the emerald cut with the diamond band, my father added. Very tasteful, very expensive. My mind reeled. You were discussing my engagement without me. It was meant to be a surprise, darling, my mother said. Then you had your crisis and broke the poor boy's heart. Jonathan and I wanted different futures, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. He expected me to become a society wife who lunched and planned charity galas. A respected position many women would envy, Grandmother Mitchell interjected. Including many of your overworked female colleagues, I'd imagine. Is that what this rebellion is really about? My father demanded. Some misguided feminist statement, proving you don't need a man or family support? It's not a rebellion, Dad. It's a career choice based on my values. Values we apparently failed to instill properly, my mother said, her voice breaking. Where did we go wrong with you? I felt heat rising to my face as I gripped my fork tighter. My hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining my emotions. Alana has always been. Different Aunt Margaret offered attempting diplomacy. Perhaps we could. Different isn't the problem, my father interrupted. Irresponsible is the problem. Self-destructive is the problem. Cousin Jessica's fiancé, Todd, cleared his throat uncomfortably. My sister volunteered for Habitat for Humanity for a year after college. Got it out of her system before law school. Maybe this is similar. Exactly, my mother seized on this. A phase. It's not a phase, I insisted. And I'd appreciate if everyone would stop talking about me like I'm having some sort of breakdown. Then stop acting like it, Bradley said bluntly. You walked away from a prestigious firm where I had to pull strings to help get you hired. You did what I interrupted. Bradley had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Dad and I spoke with Howard Harrington at the club. You were qualified, of course, but in this market, connections matter. Another revelation. Another piece of my accomplishments revealed to be family orchestration. And now my father continued, you've embarrassed Bradley professionally by quitting without adequate notice. You've embarrassed your mother, who has to explain to her friends why her daughter suddenly works for what amounts to a protest group. You've thrown away connections and opportunities people would kill for. I didn't ask for those connections, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That's the problem, Catherine interjected. You've never appreciated the advantages you were given. Some of us understand family responsibility. Is that what your marriage is? A family responsibility, I shot back. Catherine's face flushed. My marriage is none of your business. Neither is my career yours. When you're throwing away everything this family built for you, it becomes our business, my father said. His voice had dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone I remembered from childhood scoldings. When you're living in a questionable neighborhood, making choices that reflect poorly on the Mitchell name, it's very much our business, Richard Aunt Ruth said softly. At 82, she rarely inserted herself into family disagreement. My father ignored her. The trust fund your grandfather established matures on your 30th birthday. 2 years from now. I'm beginning to question whether you can be trusted with that kind of money if this is how you manage your life. The implied threat hung in the air. My mother's eyes welled with fresh tears. Where did we go wrong with you? She repeated more dramatically this time. We gave you everything. Everyone at the table was watching now, the turkey growing cold as the real Thanksgiving entertainment unfolded. The dining room seemed to shrink around me, the family portraits on the walls, generations of Mitchell's success and propriety, bearing silent witness to my apparent betrayal. I set my napkin beside my plate and straightened my spine, finding a reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed. I appreciate everything you've done for me. I began, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The education, the opportunities, the connections. But you didn't raise me to be a corporate automaton. You raised me to think critically, to work hard, to have integrity. We raised you to be successful, my father corrected. And what's your definition of success, Dad? Because mine changed when I found myself defending a pharmaceutical company that buried research showing their drug caused heart failures. 58 people died. I sat in meetings where executives calculated that settlements would cost less than a recall. My father's expression didn't change. Complex business decisions are rarely black and white, Alana. That's something you learn with maturity. Is that maturity or moral compromise? Watch your tone, he warned. I spent 3 years working on a case for Mid-Atlantic Chemical, the same company I'm suing now. I had access to internal documents showing they knowingly dumped carcinogens into the water supply in rural communities where they knew people couldn't afford to fight back. I helped them hide those documents through legal maneuvering. That's called zealous representation, Bradley interjected. It's your ethical obligation as their counsel. My ethical obligation as a human being is more important, I countered. Do you know what happened when I raised concerns to the partners? They told me to compartmentalize and focus on billable hours. That's how the real world works, my father said dismissively. You can't save everyone. I'm not trying to save everyone. I'm trying to stop actively harming people for profit. So dramatic, Catherine sighed. This righteousness is exactly why people find you difficult. I found it difficult to sleep at night, I continued. I found it difficult to look at myself in the mirror. The night I knew I had to leave, I was working at 2 a.m. on my third consecutive 100-hour week. An associate collapsed at his desk from exhaustion and was taken to the hospital. The partner's only concern was who would finish his work before the deadline. That shows commitment, my father said. Something you clearly lack. It shows dysfunction. It shows a broken system that I don't want to participate in anymore. My mother dabbed at her eyes. Do you know how embarrassing this has been? Caroline Whitaker asked about you at the club last week, Jonathan's mother. I had to explain that you were finding yourself. At your age? I'm sorry my life choices have made country club conversation awkward for you, Mom. Don't be flippant, my father snapped. Your mother has dedicated her life to this family's standing. Our standing matters, Bradley added. It affects business relationships, social connections, even the opportunities my children will have. So I should be miserable to maintain the family image. You should be realistic, Catherine said. This idealistic crusade is self-destructive. You need therapy, not a career change. I laughed incredulously. Therapy. For developing a conscience, my father set down his knife with deliberate control. That's enough. This conversation is going in circles. He fixed me with the stern gaze that had intimidated business competitors for decades. You have a choice to make, Alana. Either you come to your senses, use your connections to secure a position at a respectable firm, and rejoin the family properly, or what, Dad? Or we will be forced to reevaluate our support, financial and otherwise. The ultimatum hung in the air. My mother looked down at her plate, unwilling to contradict him, but clearly in agreement. Let me be clear, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I will not return to corporate law. I will not pretend to be someone I'm not to make you comfortable. And I will not apologize for following my conscience. My father's face hardened. He stood up slowly, deliberately placing both hands on the table as he leaned forward. Then I need to be equally clear, he said, his voice cold and final. If you can't respect this family's values and traditions, you are no longer welcome in this home. The words fell like an executioner's axe. A stunned silence enveloped the room. I felt a curious sensation of floating above the scene, watching it unfold as if it were happening to someone else. My mother's face crumpled, but she nodded in agreement with my father's proclamation. Bradley and Catherine exchanged glances, but said nothing. Their silence was its own kind of verdict. For a moment, I couldn't feel my extremities. My vision tunneled until all I could see was my father's implacable expression. The weight of what had just happened, being disowned, cast out, excommunicated from the only family I'd ever known, pressed against my chest until I struggled to breathe. With mechanical movements, I rose from my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silence. My napkin fell unnoticed to the floor. I see was all I could manage to say. The journey from the dining room to the front door spanned only 40 feet of polished hardwood and Persian rugs, but it felt like crossing a vast, unbridgeable chasm. Every step carried me further from the life I had known and deeper into uncharted territory. As I passed through the living room, memories assaulted me from every corner. The piano where I had practiced Chopin until my fingers cramped. The bay window seat where I'd read Jane Austen on rainy afternoons. The fireplace mantel showcasing photos of Mitchell family milestones, though I noticed my law school graduation picture had already been removed. No one followed me. No one called my name. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of conversation resuming silverware against china, the artificial normality of people determined to move past an unfortunate scene. I collected my coat from the hallway closet, my movements slow and deliberate, still half expecting, hoping that someone would stop me. As I reached for the doorknob, a soft touch on my arm made me turn. Aunt Ruth, my father's eldest sister, stood there. At 82, she moved quietly through family gatherings, observing more than participating. Her eyes, the same steel gray as my father's but infinitely kinder, held mine. They come around or they don't, she said, softly squeezing my hand. Either way, you'll be fine. Before I could respond, she had turned and disappeared back toward the dining room. Her message delivered her small rebellion complete. The November air hit me like a physical blow as I stepped onto the porch. The perfectly manicured front lawn, the symmetrical topiaries, the luxury cars in the circular driveway, all symbols of the Mitchell legacy I was now excised from. I made it to my car before the shaking started. My fingers fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before I managed to unlock the door. Inside the small sanctuary of my Honda Civic, a practical choice my father had always disdained, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't drive yet. My body seemed disconnected from my brain, operating on some primitive level of shock. Through the windshield, I could see the dining room window, the family continuing their Thanksgiving meal as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. My phone buzzed in my purse. "Bradley, you should apologize before it's too late." I turned the phone off without responding and finally started the engine. The drive back to Brooklyn passed in a blur of highway lights and tunnels. I moved on autopilot, my mind still catching up to the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. My apartment, the one my family had so disdained, welcomed me with its modest warmth. The living room was small but filled with books and plants instead of heirlooms and antiques. For the first time, I saw it through my family's eyes. The secondhand furniture, the bohemian throw pillows, the law school textbooks repurposed as coffee table risers. It wasn't much, but it was authentic. It was mine. The realization provided no comfort as I sank onto the couch, the emotional dam finally breaking. The tears came in overwhelming waves. Grief, rage, betrayal, and a terrible aching loss. I had always been the family outlier, but I never imagined they would actually cut me off. Disown me. Erase me from their lives over a career choice. The night stretched endlessly as I cycled through emotions. Anger at their ultimatum. Doubt about my decision. Fear about the future. The temptation to call and apologize, to surrender my autonomy for the security of family acceptance, grew stronger as the hours passed. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I found myself composing mental scripts for a reconciliation call. I could frame my career change as temporary. I could promise to look for more prestigious nonprofit positions. I could. The realization of what I was doing hit me like ice water. Even after being cast out, I was still contorting myself to fit their expectations. Still seeking approval I had never fully received. Morning light found me still on the couch, eyes swollen but mind clearer. I made a cup of tea. Earl Grey, not the expensive specialty, blend my mother shipped from London, and stood at my window overlooking the street below. Early commuters hurried past each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own versions of family complexity. My phone turned back on, showed a dozen missed calls and texts from family members. Most echoed Bradley's demand for an apology. One from Catherine suggested a therapist who specialized in career women with adjustment issues. The last message was from Aunt Ruth, proud of you. They'll come around or they won't. Either way, you'll be fine. I read it 3 times, then deleted all the other messages unread. With deliberate finality, I turned off notification sounds for my family members' contacts. The path forward was unclear, frightening, and entirely my own. For the first time in my life, I had no roadmap, no family expectations guiding my choices. The vertigo of complete freedom was terrifying. But underneath the fear and grief, something else was beginning to stir. Something that felt unexpectedly like possibility. December arrived with relentless cheer. Manhattan transformed into a holiday postcard with twinkling lights, elaborate store displays, and the scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. The city embraced the season with characteristic excess, and I had never felt more alone in my life. In the Mitchell family, Christmas was a precisely choreographed production. The tree would be decorated by professionals, while my mother supervised 12 feet tall with color-coordinated ornaments, and not a tinsel strand out of place. The family Christmas card, photographed in September, would feature everyone in coordinating outfits positioned by a professional to convey dynastical prosperity. My tiny apartment barely had room for the 3-foot artificial tree I bought on sale. I placed it by the window, decorating it with mismatched ornaments from the discount store. Its modest presence only emphasized what I had lost. The first week of December, depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I moved between work and home in a fog, going through the motions but feeling disconnected from everything around me. My appetite vanished. Sleep came in restless bursts. The simplest tasks, doing laundry, buying groceries, required monumental effort. Financial reality added practical stress to my emotional turmoil. Without family support, my budget was stretched painfully thin. I calculated and recalculated, trying to make numbers align. Holiday gifts were out of the question. Heating was kept at minimum levels. Meals became increasingly simple and repetitive. At work, my colleagues noticed the change. Maria, our communications director, invited me to lunch the second week of December. "You're not yourself lately," she said directly. "Everything okay?" I gave the automatic response. "I'm fine. Just adjusting to winter." She studied me over her sandwich. "That's not a fine face. That's an I'm barely holding it together face." I know because I've worn it. Something about her matter-of-fact kindness cracked my careful facade. In halting sentences, I found myself explaining the Thanksgiving disaster, the family ultimatum, the complete severance of my past life. Maria listened without interruption. "That's a lot to process," she said when I finished, "especially during the holidays." "I'll be fine," I insisted, embarrassed by my oversharing. "Of course you will," she agreed. "But eventually, fine doesn't mean fine right now. We're having a small gathering at my place on Christmas Eve. Nothing fancy. Just good food and good company. You should come." I appreciate that, but I wouldn't want to intrude on family time. It's mostly work friends and neighbors. My philosophy is nobody should be alone on Christmas unless they actively want to be. I thanked her but didn't commit the idea of being the pitiful single person at someone else's gathering too uncomfortable to contemplate. The following week brought a significant court hearing in our case against Mid-Atlantic Chemical. Despite my personal struggles, I found myself fully engaged in the work, meticulously preparing our arguments. The company had filed a motion to dismiss, claiming our evidence was circumstantial and our clients lacked standing. I spent 3 days drafting our response, working late into the night. The focus required pushed my personal pain temporarily aside, replaced by clarity of purpose. In court facing Mid-Atlantic's team of 5 corporate attorneys, I presented our argument with unexpected composure. When the judge denied their motion and ruled our case could proceed to discovery, the momentary triumph felt like oxygen after weeks of suffocation. "That was impressive work," my boss said afterward. "They clearly didn't expect that level of preparation." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt a flicker of professional confidence untainted by family connections. This victory, small, though it was in the overall case, belonged entirely to me. As Christmas Eve approached, my apartment's silence grew oppressive. I checked my phone occasionally, still half expecting a reconciliation call that never came. My only family contact was a brief text from Aunt Ruth asking how I was doing. Rather than face the prospect of Christmas Eve alone with my thoughts, I made a last-minute decision to volunteer at a homeless shelter downtown. They needed help serving dinner and organizing gift distribution. The coordinator seemed relieved when I called, saying they were short-staffed because of the holiday. The shelter occupied a converted warehouse in an industrial area. Inside, long tables had been set up and decorated with paper tablecloths and simple centerpieces. A small artificial tree, not unlike my own, stood in the corner with a modest pile of wrapped gifts beneath it. I was assigned to the serving line, ladling out mashed potatoes beside a retired teacher named Diane, who had volunteered there for 15 years. For 4 hours, I focused entirely on the task at hand: serving food, refilling drinks, clearing plates. The gratitude from those we served was humbling, often expressed in the simplest terms: eye contact, a nod, a quiet thank you. During a brief break, I found myself sitting next to an older man named James who was helping with cleanup. His weathered face suggested a life of hardship, but his eyes were kind. "First time volunteering?" he asked. "Is it that obvious?" "You have that look, part doing good glow, part what am I doing here uncertainty." He smiled. "It's familiar. Do you volunteer often?" "Started as a client 15 years ago," he said, matter-of-factly. "Now, I help out when I can. Full circle, you know." Something in his calm acceptance invited confidence. "I'm here because I couldn't face being alone tonight. My family and we're not speaking." James nodded. "Been there. My folks disowned me 30 years ago when I came out. Religious differences, they said. Haven't spoken since." "Does it get easier?" I asked. "Different, not easier," he replied. "You build a new kind of family. Friends, colleagues, communities like this. Some people never get their blood family back. Some do, but it's never the same. The trick is to stop waiting for them to make you whole again." His words stayed with me through the evening and into Christmas morning. Rather than face another day alone, I texted Maria accepting her invitation. By afternoon, I found myself in her small Queens apartment, surrounded by a motley collection of people. Coworkers, neighbors, Maria's extended family visiting from Puerto Rico. Her grandmother, a tiny woman with intelligent eyes, patted the sofa next to her. "Maria tells me you're having family troubles," she said without preamble. "Families are like gardens. Sometimes you must prune to allow new growth." "I'm not sure they see it that way," I replied. "Of course not," she agreed. "The pruned branches never appreciate the process." She patted my hand. "Some family we are born to, some family we find along the way. Both can be real." The afternoon unfolded in a way entirely unlike Mitchell family gatherings. The food was served buffet-style plates balanced on laps rather than arranged on fine china. Conversations flowed naturally, without strategic networking or performance. Children ran through the apartment without being scolded for decorum. No one commented on portion sizes or appropriate behavior. By evening, I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. Maria's cousin taught me the rules to a card game played in rapid Spanish. Her neighbor's toddler fell asleep against my shoulder while we watched a holiday movie. When my phone rang around 8, I was surprised to see Aunt Ruth's name. I stepped into Maria's kitchen for privacy. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Ruth." "Merry Christmas, dear. I wanted to check on you. Are you alone?" "Actually, no. I'm with friends." The word felt unfamiliar, but right. "Good. That's good." A pause. "Your mother asked about you yesterday." A complicated hope flickered. "What did she say?" "She asked if I'd heard from you." "I told her you were fine, but still finding your way." She didn't say much, but she listened. It's a small step. After we hung up, I rejoined the gathering, the weight on my chest marginally lighter. My family situation remained unresolved, but for the first time I could envision a path forward that didn't depend on their acceptance. Maria caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass in a subtle toast. I returned the gesture, feeling a small spark of something that might eventually become belonging. April brought tentative signs of spring to New York City. Cherry blossoms emerged in Central Park, and the bitter winter wind softened to occasional forgiving breezes. 5 months had passed since Thanksgiving, and I was beginning to feel the first genuine stirrings of rebuilding. My work at the Environmental Justice Alliance had evolved from simply escaping corporate law to something approaching purpose. Our case against Mid-Atlantic Chemical had advanced to discovery, and I was leading our legal team's efforts to force disclosure of internal documents. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying in ways I had never experienced at Harrington and Blake. "We've been invited to present at the National Environmental Law Conference," my director announced during our weekly staff meeting. "Alana, I'd like you to lead our panel on corporate accountability. Your insights from both sides of these cases are invaluable." The confidence she placed in me contrasted sharply with my former firm's hierarchical structure, where associates rarely received public recognition. I found myself thriving under the trust and autonomy, working harder than I ever had at my corporate job, but without the constant dread and exhaustion. My personal life was evolving too. Maria had introduced me to her wider circle of friends: artists, teachers, nonprofit workers, and community organizers. Our Friday night gatherings at a local pub became an anchor in my week. These friendships developed organically based on genuine connection rather than social obligation or networking potential. My apartment no longer felt like temporary housing. I had painted the walls a warm sage green, hung artwork by local artists, and filled the windowsills with thriving plants. The secondhand furniture now seemed charmingly eclectic rather than merely economical. I had even hosted a small dinner party cooking pasta from scratch in my tiny kitchen, while my guests crowded around the coffee table with wine glasses. Financial stability was returning gradually. A modest raise had eased the worst of my budget constraints. I still couldn't afford luxury, but the constant anxiety about making rent had subsided. I had even started a small savings account again, putting away $50 each paycheck toward future security. The only area where healing lagged was family. Apart from occasional text updates from Aunt Ruth, the silence remained unbroken. I had sent Christmas and birthday cards to my parents and siblings, receiving no acknowledgement in return. The pain had dulled from acute to chronic, a background ache I had learned to function around rather than a consuming agony. Then came an unexpected collision of worlds. I was in a coffee shop near the courthouse, reviewing deposition transcripts when I heard a familiar voice ordering at the counter. Looking up, I saw my sister Catherine immaculately dressed in designer businesswear, checking her watch impatiently. My first instinct was to hide to avoid the inevitable awkwardness. But something, perhaps newfound confidence, perhaps simple fatigue with avoidance, made me stay put. When Catherine turned with her latte, her eyes widened in recognition. "Alana," she said, her tone conveying surprise rather than warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I work nearby," I replied. "The environmental nonprofit, remember?" She hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair across from me. "May I have a few minutes before my next appointment." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in tension. Catherine commented on my appearance. "You look healthy," asked perfunctory questions about my work without listening to the answers, and provided brief updates on family members as if reading from a script. Mother redecorated the sunroom. Father's golf game is improving. Bradley and Charlotte are considering private schools for the children. "How are you, Catherine?" I asked, cutting through the superficiality. "Are you actually happy?" The directness of the question seemed to startle her. "What kind of question is that? Of course I'm happy. I have everything I could want. Do you, or do you have everything the family thinks you should want?" Her perfectly composed expression flickered. "Not everyone shares your need for dramatic self-discovery, Alana. Some of us understand compromise and responsibility. There's a difference between compromise and surrender," I said quietly. Catherine set down her cup with deliberate precision. "Mother cried for weeks after Thanksgiving, you know. They expected you to come back apologizing once you'd made your point. It wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was a life decision. Well, they're still waiting. Father says you need to learn your lesson the hard way." "And what lesson is that? That conditional love isn't love at all." Catherine's cheeks flushed. "That's unfair. They gave you everything, except the freedom to be myself." She checked her watch again, clearly eager to escape. "I should go. I have a committee meeting at the Children's Museum." As she stood, I saw something unexpected cross her face, a flicker of what might have been envy or regret. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like," she said, almost to herself, "to just walk away from the expectations. Start over." The admission hung between us, a rare moment of authenticity. Then, her social mask slipped back into place. "Take care of yourself, Alana. You too, Catherine." The brief encounter left me unsettled but strangely energized. I had faced a family member without crumbling, without apologizing for my choices. It was a small victory but significant. 2 weeks later came a much larger victory. After months of legal maneuvering, we finally obtained Mid-Atlantic Chemical's internal communications about the water contamination. The evidence was damning. Executives had explicitly discussed the cost savings of illegal disposal methods, while acknowledging the potential health risks to nearby communities. The story broke across major news outlets. Our small nonprofit found itself at the center of a national conversation about corporate accountability and environmental justice. I did several interviews explaining the legal implications, careful to focus on the facts, rather than my personal journey from corporate defense to advocacy. The morning after a particularly effective television appearance, I was walking past the glass-fronted skyscraper that housed my former law firm. Through the lobby windows, I caught a glimpse of my father watching my interview on the building's news screen. He stood motionless, his expression unreadable as I discussed the case that had now become headline news. Our eyes met briefly through the glass. He made no gesture of acknowledgement, but he didn't look away either. The moment lasted only seconds before the revolving door turned, breaking our line of sight, but it felt significant. He had seen me succeeding on my own terms. That evening, I received my first direct contact from my mother in 5 months. A text message with no greeting. "Saw you on the news. You need a better blazer for television appearances." It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was acknowledgement, and in the Mitchell family that counted as progress. As spring deepened into early summer, I marked the anniversary of my corporate law departure by painting an accent wall in my bedroom, a bold terracotta color that would have horrified my mother's subdued decorating sensibilities. Standing back to admire the vibrant tone, I realized I was smiling. Not the careful social smile I had perfected for family gatherings, but a genuine expression of satisfaction. The woman who had left that corner office a year ago, terrified but determined, would hardly recognize the person I had become. Not just professionally or financially, but fundamentally. For the first time in my life, I was making choices based on my own values rather than family expectations. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. That night, I had my first date with Daniel, an environmental science professor I had met through work. Unlike Jonathan, with his family connections and country club membership, Daniel's appeal lay in his passion for his work, his wry humor, and his complete disinterest in social climbing. We talked for hours about everything from climate policy to favorite movies, without once discussing networking opportunities or appropriate career trajectories. To new beginnings, he toasted raising his glass of reasonably priced wine in a neighborhood restaurant that would never make my mother's approval list. To authenticity, I replied, surprising myself with the word choice. As we walked through the spring evening afterward, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. The journey of the past year had stripped away so much. Family support, financial security, social position, but had given me something I never fully had before. The freedom to discover who I actually was, when not defined by the Mitchell name and expectations. That I was beginning to understand was worth everything I had lost. Approaching the one-year anniversary of the Thanksgiving dinner that had severed my family ties, I found myself in a place of cautious stability. The Environmental Justice Alliance had promoted me to senior legal counsel following our successful settlement with Mid-Atlantic Chemical. My relationship with Daniel had deepened into something quietly meaningful. My circle of friends, real friends, not strategic connections, had expanded through work and community involvement. The change was internal, as well as external. The constant need for validation that had driven me through childhood and into my legal career had softened to a more sustainable self-motivation. The reflexive Mitchell family voice in my head, questioning every non-strategic choice, had gradually quieted, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. In late October, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox, the Mitchell family crest embossed on the back flap. My mother's handwriting addressed it formally to Miss Alana Mitchell. Inside was a single sheet of monogrammed stationery. Alana, it began without preamble. Your continued absence has been noted at family gatherings. While your father and I remain disappointed by your career choices, we recognize that estrangement serves no one's interests. If you wish to discuss a rapprochement, I am available for lunch at the Peninsula on Tuesday next. Eleanor Mitchell. Not an apology, not even particularly warm. But from my mother, it was practically an olive branch extended with both hands. I read it 3 times, trying to decipher the subtext and motivation. Was it genuine reconciliation or an attempt to bring the prodigal daughter back under control before the holidays? I discussed it with Daniel that evening over dinner in my apartment. What do you think they really want? He asked. Conformity, probably, I sighed. But maybe just connection. Even my parents must feel the absence after a year. Do you want to see them? The question gave me pause. Did I? The pain had dulled over time, but seeing them risked reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. I think I need to, I finally answered. Not for them, but for me. To show myself I can face them as an equal, not as the disappointing daughter. I responded to my mother's note with a brief acceptance. The following Tuesday found me at the Peninsula Hotel dressed in a professional outfit that balanced my current authentic style with enough concession to my mother's expectations to avoid immediate criticism. Eleanor Mitchell was already seated when I arrived, perfectly coiffed and accessorized as always. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume, the same she'd worn my entire life, triggering a cascade of childhood memories. You look well, she said, appraising me with practiced eyes. The environmental work agrees with you, it seems. It does, I confirmed, sitting across from her. How are you and Dad? The conversation that followed was a careful dance around substantive issues. She updated me on family news, Bradley's promotion, Catherine's committee chairmanships, various extended family achievements. I shared selective details about my work, emphasizing the professional aspects rather than the ideological ones. Coffee arrived, then lunch, then dessert, all without addressing the elephant in the room. It was classic Eleanor Mitchell conflict avoidance, and for a moment I considered letting it pass, accepting this superficial reconnection without pushing for more. But the past year had changed me. Mom, I said finally, setting down my coffee cup. Why did you reach out now after a year of silence? She smoothed her napkin buying time. The holidays are approaching. Family should be together for holidays. The same family that told me I wasn't welcome anymore. She flinched slightly. Your father was upset. We all were. You had thrown away everything we'd worked for. I hadn't thrown away anything. I'd made a different choice, one that fulfilled me, at the expense of family expectations. Why do those expectations matter more than my happiness or well-being? My mother sighed. You've always been so dramatic, Alana. Not everything is about self-actualization. Sometimes it's about duty and responsibility to something larger than yourself. I am responsible to something larger, just not the Mitchell family reputation. A silence fell between us, teetering between reconciliation and renewed estrangement. Finally, my mother spoke again. Your father misses you, she said, surprising me. He won't say it, but he does. He watches your interviews when you're on the news. I saw him once through the window at Harrington and Blake. She nodded. He has opinions about your legal arguments, professional critiques, but also pride, I think, though he'd never admit it. It was the closest she would come to saying they had been wrong. I recognized the opportunity being offered. Not apology, but a narrow bridge back. I love you and Dad, I said carefully. But I won't return to corporate law. I won't pretend to be someone I'm not, to make family gatherings more comfortable. And I won't apologize for following my conscience. My mother studied me for a long moment. You are very much your father's daughter beneath it all. That same stubbornness. She reached for the check. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks. Your place is open at the table if you want it. It wasn't everything I might have hoped for, but it was something, a crack in the wall of family rejection. I'll think about it, I promised. Walking out of the hotel afterward, I felt neither victorious nor defeated. Just clear-eyed about the complicated conditional nature of family love. The Mitchell definition of family might never fully expand to embrace my choices, but perhaps we could find a way to coexist authentically. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Ruth. It's my 80th birthday next weekend, she announced without greeting. I'm having a small gathering at the country house. I'd like you to come. Will my parents be there? Of course. And Bradley and Catherine and the cousins. It's family, dear. Family. The word still carried such complicated weight. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Aunt Ruth. Nonsense. They'll behave. And if they don't, I'll set them straight. I'm 80 now. I can say what I please. The birthday gathering was indeed small by Mitchell standards. Only 30 people instead of the usual 50 plus. I arrived with Daniel as my buffer and support, though I had warned him extensively about what to expect. Just be yourself, he had said, adjusting his non-designer tie. That's who I'm interested in, not the Mitchell family connection. My father acknowledged me with a nod from across the room, but made no move to approach. My mother kissed my cheek and welcomed Daniel with practiced hospitality. Bradley's greeting was professionally cordial, as if we were business associates rather than siblings. It was Catherine who surprised me most. Your apartment looks nice, she said quietly during a moment alone. I drove past it last week. The neighborhood seems interesting. You came to Brooklyn voluntarily. I teased gently. A small, genuine smile cracked her social veneer. I've been thinking about what you said, about compromise versus surrender. She glanced across the room at her husband, who was deep in conversation with my father. I don't have your courage, Alana, but I admire it. Before I could respond, Bradley approached with refilled champagne glasses. Shop talk at a party. Very gauche, he joked, but there was less condescension in his tone than there might have been a year ago. Later, finding a moment alone with my father proved both easier and harder than expected. He was standing on the terrace looking out over Aunt Ruth's gardens when I joined him. The Mid-Atlantic settlement was significant, he said after a moment of silence. Your legal strategy was effective. Coming from Richard Mitchell, this constituted high praise. Thank you, I said simply. You could have accomplished more at a proper firm. I've accomplished exactly what I aim to do. He sipped his scotch. Your mother says you're happy. I am. That's something, I suppose. It was an acceptance. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was acknowledgement and from my father that counted as progress. As autumn deepened toward another Thanksgiving, I made a decision. Instead of returning to my parents' house for the holiday, accepting my place at the table under the old terms, I would host my own gathering. My apartment was small, but with creative furniture arrangement, it could accommodate a modest group. I sent invitations to the people who had sustained me through the past year. Maria and her grandmother colleagues from the Environmental Justice Alliance Daniel friends, who had become chosen family. I also sent invitations to Aunt Ruth, and after considerable deliberation to my parents and siblings. They probably won't come, I told Daniel as we prepared the apartment the night before. Maybe not, he agreed. But the invitation itself matters. Thanksgiving morning brought unexpected responses. Aunt Ruth arrived first, bearing heirloom serving dishes on indefinite loan. My cousin Jessica came with her husband, curious about my alternative lifestyle in Brooklyn. Most surprisingly, Catherine appeared mid-afternoon alone. James and the children are at his parents', she explained, handing me a bottle of wine. I told them I had a migraine. Her small act of rebellion touched me deeply. My parents and Bradley didn't attend as expected. But my mother sent a brief text, "Happy Thanksgiving. Save leftovers. Your father might want to try your cooking sometime." As I looked around my crowded apartment that evening, Aunt Ruth teaching Maria's grandmother her secret cranberry recipe, Daniel deep in conversation with Jessica's husband about renewable energy, Catherine relaxing visibly with each glass of wine. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this makeshift, imperfect family we were creating. The journey from that devastating dinner a year ago to this moment had been painful, complicated, and necessary. I had lost the unquestioning support of my birth family, but gained something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that I could stand alone if necessary, but also the freedom to build connections based on mutual respect, rather than obligation. Home, I had discovered, wasn't the imposing colonial house in Greenwich, or even my modest Brooklyn apartment. Home was the space I had finally created within myself. The alignment of internal values with external choices, the freedom to be authentic without apology. As I raised my glass for a toast, I caught Catherine's eye across the table. The silent acknowledgement that passed between us, recognition of different paths, different choices, different definitions of success, felt like the beginning of a new kind of relationship. Not the one prescribed by family tradition, but one we might create ourselves. To finding home, I toasted wherever and however it exists. The glasses clinked in response, the sound ringing with possibility. What's your experience with family expectations? Have you ever had to choose between authenticity and belonging? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share so others facing similar crossroads know they're not alone. Thank you for being part of this community where we can be our authentic selves. Remember, sometimes the family we build is as important as the family we're born into.